Marcus Chen wiped the sweat from his brow as he descended into the abandoned subway tunnel beneath New Manhattan. The year 2387 had not been kind to humanity. The Zephyrian Empire controlled most of the galaxy, treating humans as little more than expendable labor. Earth itself had become a mining colony, its surface scarred by massive extraction operations that fed the alien war machine. The tunnel stretched endlessly before him, lit only by the flickering emergency strips that somehow still functioned after decades of neglect. Marcus carried his grandfather's metal detector, a relic from the old world when humans still believed they owned their planet. The device had been modified with salvaged alien tech, humming softly as it searched for anything of value in the rubble. 3 beeps echoed through the darkness. Marcus stopped, his heart racing. After months of searching through the ruins of human civilization, he had found countless pieces of scrap metal and old electronics. Nothing that would help him buy his sister's freedom from the labor camps on Titan. Nothing that would change their desperate situation. The detector's display showed something unusual buried beneath a collapsed section of the platform. Marcus grabbed his plasma torch and began cutting through the twisted metal and concrete. Hours passed as he worked, his muscles aching from the effort. The air grew thick with dust and the acrid smell of melted steel. Finally, his torch broke through into a small chamber that had somehow survived the destruction. Inside, sitting on what appeared to be an ancient altar, was a lamp unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It seemed to be made of a material that shifted between metal and crystal, its surface covered in symbols that hurt to look at directly. The lamp pulsed with an inner light that made the surrounding shadows dance. Marcus reached out tentatively, his fingers barely brushing the surface before brilliant light filled the chamber. The lamp grew warm in his hands, then hot, then impossibly hot without burning him. Smoke began pouring from its spout, but not ordinary smoke. This was something alive, something aware that regarded him with ancient intelligence. The smoke swirled and condensed into the most beautiful woman Marcus had ever seen. Her skin held the warm golden tone of desert sands, and her dark hair floated as if underwater. She wore flowing robes that seemed to be cut from starlight itself, and her eyes held depths that spoke of witnessing the birth and death of civilizations. "I am Zahara of the Jinn," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in Marcus's chest. "You have freed me from my prison, and so I grant you 3 wishes, as is the ancient law. Choose carefully, mortal, for these gifts cannot be undone." Marcus stared at her, his mind reeling. In all his years scavenging through the ruins, he had never believed the old stories about magic and genies. Yet, here she stood, radiating power that made his teeth ache and his vision blur around the edges. 3 wishes, he repeated slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "Anything I want?" Zahara nodded gracefully. "Within reason. I cannot bring back the dead, force love upon another, or grant more wishes. But yes, I can reshape reality to your desires." Most humans wish for wealth, power, or immortality. Some ask for the return of lost lovers. All are simple matters for one of my kind. Marcus felt his knees buckle as the weight of possibility crashed down upon him. He could wish for his sister's freedom. He could wish for the Zephyrians to leave Earth. He could wish for humanity to reclaim its place among the stars. The lamp had given him the power to change everything. But as he looked at Zahara, something else occurred to him. Something in her eyes, a sadness that seemed as ancient as the cosmos itself. She spoke of granting wishes as if it were a burden, not a gift. Her posture suggested resignation rather than joy at her freedom. "How long were you trapped in that lamp?" Marcus asked. Zahara blinked, clearly surprised by the question. In her millennia of existence, she had been asked for riches, for power, for revenge. Never had anyone inquired about her own suffering. 12,000 years, she replied, her voice softer now. "Since the fall of the Atlantean civilization. I was bound by a sorcerer king who feared my power but was too greedy to simply let me go." Marcus felt something twist in his chest. 12,000 years of imprisonment, of being forced to grant the selfish desires of whoever happened to stumble across her prison. He thought of his own captivity, the way the Zephyrians had caged all of humanity. But his suffering was nothing compared to hers. "The wishes," Marcus said carefully. "What happens after I make them? Do you return to the lamp?" "That depends," Zahara replied, studying his face with growing confusion. "If you make all 3 wishes, I am free to go wherever I choose. But if you leave any unused, I remain bound to serve you until death claims you or you pass the lamp to another." Marcus nodded slowly, pieces of a plan forming in his mind. Around them, the ruins of human civilization pressed in like a physical weight. Somewhere above, Zephyrian overseers worked human slaves until they collapsed from exhaustion. His sister Sarah labored in the ice mines of Titan, her messages growing shorter and more desperate each month. He had the power to fix all of it. 3 wishes could restore humanity to greatness, could make the aliens pay for what they had done. All he had to do was speak the words, and Zahara would make it reality. Instead, Marcus looked into her ancient eyes and made a choice that would echo across the galaxy. "I wish," he said clearly, "for you to tell me about yourself, about who you were before the lamp, about your dreams and hopes and what you want most in all the universe." The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Zahara stared at him as if he had grown a second head, her perfect features showing an emotion he couldn't identify. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked like breaking crystal. "That is your first wish? Not wealth or power or the freedom of your people, but to know about me?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time in years it reached his eyes. "That's my first wish." Zahara sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face in rivers of liquid starlight. In 12,000 years of granting wishes, no one had ever used their power to simply ask about her well-being. No one had ever treated her as more than a magical tool to be exploited. "I was once a scholar," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I studied the mathematical harmonies that hold reality together. I discovered that existence itself could be reshaped through understanding rather than force. I wanted to teach others, to share the beauty I had found in the fundamental structures of creation." She looked up at Marcus with wonder shining in her eyes. "I dreamed of a universe where all beings could touch the infinite, where the barriers between mortal and divine were merely illusions to be overcome through knowledge and compassion. But power corrupts, and those who bound me saw only what I could give them, never what I hoped to achieve." Marcus felt tears of his own beginning to fall. Here was a being of unimaginable power, reduced to a slave by the greed of others. Her story was humanity's story, told across cosmic scales. The strong had always preyed upon the weak, taking what they wanted and justifying it with whatever excuses allowed them to sleep at night. "Your second wish, my liberator?" Zahara asked, though her tone suggested she already knew it would be unlike any other. Marcus thought of Sarah, freezing in the alien mines. He thought of Earth's poisoned skies and broken cities. He thought of the millions of humans scattered across the galaxy, treated as property by beings who saw them as nothing more than useful animals. But he also thought of Zahara, kneeling before him in chains made of ancient magic and cosmic law. He thought of 12,000 years of solitude and forced servitude. He thought of dreams deferred until they became nightmares. The choice was easier than it should have been. Marcus looked at Zahara, still kneeling before him with tears of starlight on her cheeks. The weight of his second wish pressed against his chest like a physical thing. He could feel the power flowing through the air between them, reality itself holding its breath as it waited for his words. "My second wish," Marcus said slowly, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was about to do, "is for you to be completely and permanently free. Free from the lamp, free from the binding laws that force you to grant wishes, free to go anywhere and do anything you choose without restriction or obligation to anyone, including me." The underground chamber fell silent, except for the distant hum of alien machinery far above. Zahara's eyes went wide, her mouth opening and closing without sound as she processed what she had just heard. In the entire history of her bondage, no one had ever used a wish to free her. The very concept seemed to break something fundamental in her understanding of mortal nature. "You cannot mean this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You still have needs. Your sister in the ice mines, your people under alien occupation. I can sense the pain in your heart, the desperate desire to save them. Why would you waste a wish on my freedom when you could have anything you desire?" Marcus knelt down beside her, his rough human hands taking her smooth, perfect ones. The contrast struck him. Scarred flesh from years of hard labor against skin that had never known true hardship until her imprisonment began. "It's not a waste," he said gently. "You're not a tool, Zahara. You're a person, a being with hopes and dreams and the right to choose your own path. No one should be forced to serve others against their will, no matter what power they possess." Golden chains that had been invisible suddenly materialized around Zahara's wrists and ankles, ancient symbols blazing with cosmic fire. The laws of binding that had held her for 12 millennia fought against Marcus's wish, reality groaning under the strain of forces that predated human civilization. Then the chain shattered. The sound was like breaking stars, a crystalline note that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Light exploded outward from Zahara's form, and for a moment Marcus thought he saw her true nature, vast and terrible and beautiful beyond description. She was mathematics made manifest, the living embodiment of the equations that governed existence itself. When the light faded, Zahara sat in stunned silence, staring at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. She flexed her fingers experimentally, then stood and took a few tentative steps. No invisible force pulled her back toward the lamp. No cosmic law demanded she await Marcus's third wish before claiming her freedom. "I am free," she said, wonder coloring every syllable. "After 12,000 years, I am truly free." Marcus smiled despite the ache in his chest. He had just given up the chance to save his sister, to liberate humanity, to claim vengeance against the aliens who had destroyed his world. But looking at Zahara's face, seeing joy replace the ancient sadness in her eyes, he knew he had made the right choice. "What will you do now?" he asked. Zahara turned to him, and her expression had changed completely. Where before there had been resignation and barely concealed pain, now there was something else. Something that made the air around her crackle with potential energy. "I should go," she said, her voice carrying new harmonics that made the walls vibrate. "I should leave this place and explore the cosmos as I have dreamed of doing for so long. I should seek out others of my kind, see what has become of the universe during my imprisonment." She paused, studying Marcus with eyes that seemed to see straight through him to his soul. "But I find myself curious about something," she continued. "You are the first human I have encountered in 3,000 years, the first being in 12 millennia to show me kindness without expecting anything in return. I want to understand what makes your species different." Marcus laughed bitterly. "Different? We're not different. We're slaves just like you were. The Zephyrians conquered us 50 years ago. They strip mine our worlds, work us to death in their factories, and treat us like we're barely intelligent animals. Humanity's greatest achievement these days is surviving until tomorrow." Zahara's eyes narrowed, and Marcus felt the temperature in the chamber drop several degrees. When she spoke, her voice carried undertones that made his bones ache. "Tell me about these Zephyrians." For the next hour, Marcus found himself describing humanity's fall from grace. He told her about the war that lasted only 6 months, about Earth's surrender when the aliens demonstrated they could crack continents like eggs. He spoke of the labor camps, the systematic destruction of human culture, the way entire generations had grown up knowing nothing but servitude. As he talked, Zahara's expression grew darker. Power radiated from her in waves that made the air shimmer, and Marcus began to understand that he might have severely underestimated what he had just set free. "These Zephyrians," she said when he finished. "They sound remarkably similar to the sorcerer kings who once bound me. Beings who believe that might makes right, that the strong have the natural authority to enslave the weak." She stood and began pacing, her movements sharp and predatory. Each footstep left small cracks in the concrete floor. "You still have one wish remaining," she said suddenly, stopping to face him. "I am no longer bound to grant it, but I find myself curious. What would you ask for? If you could have anything." Marcus thought about it seriously. The honest answer came to him immediately, but he hesitated to voice it. Zahara was free now. She had no obligation to help him or anyone else. Asking for her aid would be taking advantage of her gratitude, wouldn't it? "I wish I could save them," he said finally. "All of them. Every human being suffering under alien rule. My sister Sarah in the ice mines of Titan. The families torn apart and scattered across the galaxy. The children who've never known what it means to be free. I wish I could give humanity back its dignity and its future." Zahara nodded slowly, as if his answer confirmed something she had been thinking. "That is what I hoped you would say," she replied. "You see, Marcus Chen of Earth, you have shown me something I had forgotten existed in this universe. You have shown me that compassion can triumph over self-interest, that some beings will sacrifice their own desires to do what is right." She moved closer to him, her presence making the very air hum with possibility. "I told you I was once a scholar who studied the mathematical harmonies of existence," she continued. "What I did not mention is that I also studied warfare. The Jinn were not always peaceful beings. We fought wars that reshaped galaxies, conflicts that ended civilizations and birthed new forms of reality." Marcus felt his mouth go dry as implications began to dawn on him. "The Zephyrians believe they are apex predators," Zahara said, her voice growing cold as the space between stars. "They think their technology and their brutality make them unassailable. They have never encountered a truly ancient power, never faced a being who remembers when their ancestors were crawling through primordial mud." She smiled, and it was beautiful and terrible at the same time. "I believe it is time they received an education." Before Marcus could respond, Zahara raised her hand and spoke a single word in a language that predated human speech. The world around them began to change, reality bending to accommodate her will. The ruined subway tunnel transformed, walls straightening and expanding until they stood in a vast chamber carved from living crystal. Floating displays materialized in the air, showing real-time images of human colonies across the galaxy. "I'm going to offer you a partnership," Zahara said, her voice echoing strangely in the transformed space. "Not as master and servant, not as wisher and wish-granter, but as equals working toward a common goal. You have freed me from 12,000 years of bondage. In return, I offer to help you free your people from theirs." Marcus stared at the displays, seeing his sister's face among the images of human prisoners. His hands began to shake as hope, an emotion he had almost forgotten, began to bloom in his chest. "What exactly are you proposing?" he asked. Zahara's smile grew wider, showing teeth that gleamed like polished diamonds. War, she said simply. A war unlike anything the galaxy has seen since the ancient days. The Zephyrians have grown complacent, convinced of their superiority. They will learn what happens when you cage beings who are meant to fly free. She gestured to the floating displays, and they began showing technical readouts of alien ships and weapons. But first, she continued, you need to understand what you're truly capable of. Humans are not the weak, helpless creatures the Zephyrians believe them to be. Your species has potential that even I find remarkable. With the right knowledge, the right tools, and the right motivation, humanity could become something extraordinary. Marcus felt his heart racing as possibilities he had never dared imagine began to take shape in his mind. But he forced himself to think carefully, to consider the magnitude of what Zahara was suggesting. This won't be simple, he said. The Zephyrians have controlled the galaxy for centuries. They have fleets that can destroy solar systems, weapons that can turn planets to ash. Even with your power, we're talking about fighting an empire that spans thousands of worlds. Zahara nodded approvingly. You think like a strategist, not a dreamer. Good. You are right that this will not be easy. But consider this. The Zephyrians rule through fear and overwhelming force. They have never faced an enemy who could match their power, while also possessing something they lack entirely. Which is? The willingness to sacrifice for others, Zahara replied. The ability to put the greater good above personal gain. The strength that comes from fighting for something larger than oneself. These are uniquely human traits, Marcus. Your people have them in abundance, even after 50 years of oppression. She waved her hand, and the displays shifted to show human resistance movements on dozens of worlds, small groups of fighters who continued to struggle against impossible odds, never giving up hope that someday their people might be free again. They never stopped fighting, Marcus whispered, seeing the truth of it for the first time. Even when it seemed hopeless, they never surrendered completely. Exactly, Zahara said. And now they will have the tools they need to turn that courage into victory. I propose we begin with your sister and the prisoners on Titan. Consider it a demonstration of what we can accomplish together. The ice mines of Titan had never been designed for comfort. They were carved from frozen methane and water ice, a maze of tunnels that descended deep into the moon's core where rare crystalline formations grew in the crushing cold. The Zephyrian overseers maintained the temperature just above the threshold that would kill their human workers outright, finding the balance between efficiency and cruelty with scientific precision. Sarah Chen hauled another cart of ice crystals through the narrow passage, her breath coming in ragged clouds despite the environmental suit's heating elements. She had been working for 14 hours straight, same as every day for the past 3 years. Her hands had long since lost feeling, and the chronic ache in her back had become so familiar she barely noticed it anymore. The Zephyrian guard clicked its mandibles impatiently as she struggled with the cart's weight. The alien stood nearly 8 feet tall, its chitinous shell gleaming with an oily iridescence under the harsh work lights. Like all of its species, it regarded humans as barely sentient animals, useful only for tasks too dangerous or demeaning for proper beings. "Move faster, meat!" it hissed in the broken English the overseers used with their prisoners. "Quota not met means no food rations." Sarah bit back the response that burned in her throat. She had learned years ago that defiance only brought pain, and she needed her strength for the other prisoners who looked to her for leadership. At 28, she was one of the oldest humans in the mine, and her engineering background from before the conquest made her invaluable for planning the small acts of sabotage that kept hope alive. As she rounded the corner into the main processing chamber, every light in the facility flickered simultaneously. The Zephyrian guards chittered nervously, their weapons powering up automatically. Power fluctuations were not uncommon in the mines, but something about this felt different. Then the lights went out completely. Emergency illumination kicked in a moment later, bathing everything in hellish red. But the red light revealed something impossible. A man stood in the center of the chamber, completely unprotected by environmental gear, yet showing no signs of distress from the killing cold. Beside him was a woman whose very presence seemed to bend light around her, making the air shimmer with barely contained energy. "Sarah Chen," the man called out, his voice carrying clearly across the vast space. "I'm Marcus. Your brother sent me." Sarah's knees nearly buckled. Marcus had been missing for months, presumed dead by the resistance networks that tried to track such things. But here he stood, somehow alive, and accompanied by someone who radiated power like a miniature star. The Zephyrian guards opened fire without hesitation, their plasma rifles sending coherent beams of destruction toward the intruders. The beams struck some kind of invisible barrier around the woman and simply ceased to exist, their energy absorbed and dissipated harmlessly. Zahara raised one delicate hand, and every weapon in the chamber crumpled like paper. The guards themselves were lifted gently into the air, held suspended by forces they could not comprehend or resist. "I am Zahara of the Jinn," she announced, her voice carrying harmonics that made the ice walls ring like crystal bells. "I have come to reclaim what was stolen. These humans are under my protection now." One of the Zephyrian overseers, braver or more foolish than the others, activated its communication implant to call for reinforcements. Zahara gestured almost casually, and the device dissolved into component atoms. "There will be no reinforcements," she said calmly. "Your orbital platforms have been disabled. Your ships have been relocated to the edge of the system. You have precisely 10 minutes to evacuate this facility before I lose my patience entirely." The overseer's mandibles clacked frantically as it processed this information. The Zephyrians had ruled the galaxy for so long that they had forgotten what it meant to face a superior force. When faced with the incomprehensible, they defaulted to aggression. "Impossible!" it shrieked. "No being has such power. You are some human trick, some holographic deception." Zahara's expression didn't change, but the temperature in the chamber dropped another 20 degrees. Ice began forming on the Zephyrian shells, frost spreading across their bodies with geometric precision. 9 minutes, she said. The aliens broke and ran, their chittering voices echoing through the tunnels as they fled toward their ships. Within moments, every Zephyrian in the facility was abandoning their posts, streaming toward the surface in panic. Sarah stared at the scene in shock, unable to process what she was witnessing. Around her, the other human prisoners emerged from their hiding places, hundreds of gaunt faces reflecting the same bewildered hope she felt. Marcus approached her carefully, as if afraid she might disappear. When he spoke, his voice cracked with emotion. "I'm so sorry it took so long," he whispered. "I promised I would find a way to free you, and I almost didn't. I almost gave up hope." Sarah threw her arms around her brother, tears freezing on her cheeks before they could fall. "How?" she managed to ask. "How is any of this possible?" "It's a long story," Marcus replied, glancing at Zahara with something that might have been awe. "But the short version is that humanity has an ally now, someone who understands what it means to be enslaved and who has the power to do something about it." Zahara moved through the crowd of liberated prisoners, her hands glowing with soft light as she touched each person. Whatever she did seemed to restore their strength, healing the damage done by years of brutal labor. Children who had never known warmth began to laugh as their bodies remembered what it felt like to be comfortable. "This is only the beginning," Zahara announced, her voice somehow reaching every person in the facility, despite the vast distances involved. You have suffered under alien rule for 50 years, but that ends today. I have seen your courage, your refusal to break even under the worst conditions. I have witnessed your willingness to help each other when you had nothing left to give. These qualities make you worthy of freedom." She gestured, and the air around them began to shimmer. When it cleared, they were no longer in the ice mines. Instead, they stood in a vast chamber that seemed to be carved from living crystal, its walls pulsing with inner light. Through transparent sections, they could see stars wheeling in their courses, confirming that they were now aboard some kind of vessel. "Welcome to my ship," Zahara said. "It has waited for my return since before your son was born. Now it will serve as our mobile base as we liberate every human colony in the galaxy." An elderly man, who had been the mine's unofficial leader, stepped forward hesitantly. "Forgive me, but who are you really? What do you want from us in return for this miracle?" Zahara's expression softened. "I am someone who knows what captivity feels like. As for what I want, I have already received it. Your brother showed me kindness when he had every reason to be selfish. He used his power to free me instead of advancing his own interests. That simple act of compassion has inspired me to do the same." She raised her hand, and holographic displays materialized throughout the chamber. They showed star maps marking every known human colony, with tactical information about Zephyrian defenses and deployment patterns. "But I will not impose my will upon you," she continued. "This must be your choice. I can give you the tools to fight, the knowledge to strike effectively, and the protection to survive retaliation. But the decision to wage war against an empire must come from you." Sarah looked around at the faces of her fellow prisoners. These were people who had lost everything, who had every reason to want nothing more than safety and peace. But she saw something else in their eyes now. She saw anger, determination, and the fierce joy of people who had just remembered what it felt like to have hope. "They took our children," said a woman whose own daughter had been shipped to a factory world years earlier. "They broke our families and scattered us across the stars like dust. They treated us like animals, worked us until we died, and replaced us with more of the same." Others began speaking up, their voices growing stronger with each word. "They destroyed our cities and turned our homeworld into a strip mine. They made us forget our own culture, our own history. They told us we were nothing, that we deserved what happened to us." Sarah felt something ignite in her chest, a flame that had been smoldering for years but never allowed to burn freely. She stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the vast chamber. "Then we remind them what humanity is capable of," she said. "We show them that some cages can't hold what they were built to contain. We fight, not just for ourselves, but for every human being still suffering under their rule." A cheer rose from the assembled prisoners, voices that had been silenced by despair now raised in defiance. Zahara smiled, and the light within the ship's walls pulsed brighter in response to their determination. "Then let us begin your education," she said. "You will need to learn technologies beyond your current understanding, tactics that can overcome numerical superiority, and strategies that can turn the Zephyrians' own strengths against them." The holographic displays shifted, showing detailed technical specifications for weapons and ships that seemed to blend advanced science with something that could only be called magic. But as Zahara began explaining the principles behind them, the distinction became meaningless. What mattered was that these tools could level the playing field between humanity and its oppressors. Over the following days, the liberated prisoners became students and then soldiers. They learned to pilot ships that moved faster than light without engines, to wield weapons that could disrupt matter at the quantum level, and to coordinate their efforts across vast distances through quantum entanglement networks. But most importantly, they learned that they were not alone. Zahara's ship visited one human colony after another, each time growing stronger as more people joined their cause. The Zephyrian Empire began to face something it had never encountered before, an enemy that combined human determination with cosmic-level technology, led by beings who understood both war and justice. Marcus stood on the observation deck as their ship approached Earth, the blue jewel that had once been humanity's crown now scarred by decades of exploitation. Beside him, Sarah reviewed tactical reports from liberation operations across the galaxy. Behind them, Zahara worked with human engineers to design new weapons that would give their people permanent advantages over their former masters. "Do you think we can really do this?" Sarah asked. "Free everyone, I mean. Restore what we've lost?" Marcus thought about his first meeting with Zahara, about the choice he had made to value her freedom over his own desires. That decision had changed everything, setting in motion events that would reshape the galaxy. "I think," he said slowly, "that the universe has a way of rewarding those who choose compassion over selfishness. We freed someone who had the power to free others. She's teaching us to become the kind of people who can protect what we've regained." As if hearing his words, Zahara appeared beside them. Her appearance had changed subtly over the weeks they had worked together. The ancient sadness was gone from her eyes, replaced by something that looked remarkably like hope. "The last Zephyrian fortress has fallen," she announced. "Their emperor has requested terms for surrender." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as the magnitude of their victory finally sank in. After 50 years of slavery, humanity was free. Not just free, but transformed into something stronger than they had ever been before. "What terms will you offer them?" Marcus asked. Zahara's expression grew thoughtful. "The same terms you offered me. Freedom to choose their own path, with the understanding that future aggression will be met with overwhelming response. Some of them are genuinely evil, driven by cruelty and the desire to dominate others. Those will face justice, but many are simply products of their culture, raised to believe that might makes right. They can learn better, given the chance." Marcus nodded, understanding the wisdom in her approach. Revenge might feel satisfying in the short term, but building a better galaxy required more than just defeating their enemies. "So what happens now?" Sarah asked. "We've won the war, but what comes next?" Zahara smiled, the expression lighting up her face like sunrise. "Now you become who you were always meant to be. Humanity will take its place among the great civilizations of the galaxy, not as conquerors, but as protectors. You have learned that true strength comes from lifting others up rather than tearing them down." She gestured toward Earth, spinning slowly in the view screen before them. "Your homeworld will be restored, your people reunited, your culture rebuilt and allowed to flourish. But more than that, you will carry the lessons you've learned to others who still suffer under oppression. The galaxy is vast, and there are always those who prey upon the weak. They will find, as the Zephyrians did, that humanity stands against such predations." Marcus felt a deep sense of completion, as if a story that had begun in the ruins beneath New Manhattan was finally reaching its proper conclusion. His choice to free Zahara had saved not just his own people, but created the possibility for countless others to find freedom as well. The Genie had granted him far more than 3 wishes. She had shown him that the greatest magic in the universe was the willingness to put others' well-being ahead of your own, and that such choices could literally reshape reality. As their ship descended toward Earth's healing surface, Marcus made a silent promise to honor that lesson for the rest of his life. Humanity had been given a second chance, and he would spend every day ensuring they proved worthy of it.